Hi there. I realize it's been a while since my last video, but as has been the case so often in the past, it seems that, well, how should I put it? There were a number of aborted attempts at a video since the last one that I actually posted. I was going to try and make a video from the presentation that I spoke of in my last video. However, what I found with that is that putting together a keynote or PowerPoint presentation and presenting it over a Zoom meeting is quite a bit different from putting together a video. Some of the content in there would have ended up being probably flagged because it was fine for me to use it in a small, relatively private group as an educational piece, but to put it on YouTube, then we have a whole different mess of copyright issues. And that, of course, could get the video flagged and removed. So I thought about that. And I said, okay, well, I can take out all that content. But then when I looked at what I was left with, there would be pretty much a tremendous amount of explanation necessary for me to actually be able to present it. So, well, I haven't completely given up on the idea, but you may have to wait for the future for me to come up with a better way of dealing with it. Street photography is something that, as I said, I'm very interested in. I like so many other people, I do not live in a large city. The city of Moncton, which adjoins the smaller town that I live in, is not a particularly busy downtown area. So the opportunities are there because, let's face it, you don't need a big city to do street photography. But I haven't, because of many other things as well that are getting in the way, haven't really had a chance to do much of anything with it in the past little while. I have, of course, been doing a lot of family photography. I just came back from a trip to St. John's, Newfoundland, where I was visiting two of my sons, and one of them has two children. So there was quite a nice visit there with lots of opportunities to take people pictures. There were a lot of family members got together. There were a couple of shared meals. The result is lots and lots of photographs, but not really photographs that I want to share here. Something a little more personal. Now, I've said before in some of my earlier videos that these are, of course, the most important pictures I think that we take. Unless you're a professional photographer, unless you are an established art photographer, then really it's family that probably means the most in your photography. If you travel somewhere, you're likely not traveling alone. You may have a significant other, or you may have an entire family with you, or just a bunch of friends. The photography you take on those travels should, and I do mean that, should reflect that. It should be lots of images of those friends and family, because that's what's really going to count. Simple, what I'll call postcard images, where you're trying to replicate something that you could probably get in the gift shop, is not only a waste of effort, it's also rather futile. It means comparing your images to images that were shot under, let us say, probably far more ideal conditions by a professional photographer. Does that mean his pictures are better than yours? No. It just means it's been done. If it's been done, then move on and look for something else. Because of my interest in people photography, I've found that I'm using shorter lenses a lot. Now again, this is a rehash of something I mentioned before, but this old lens, this is the Pancake 17 millimeter that came out with the original EP1. So that is a lens that would have been associated with this camera right here. Now, it's not on this camera because I have been using it with my EM1 as an excellent little street photography camera. The field of view, of course, is equivalent to 34 millimeters, making it very close to the 35 millimeter that's popular with a lot of street photographers. Now, primarily, I'm more a 50 millimeter person. So a 25 millimeter on this camera would, for the most part, be more familiar to me. But I'm finding that the wider angle of view that the 34 millimeter, 35 millimeter equivalent gives me is it's quite good when I'm working in relatively tight places, or when I really want to get in close to the action and not leave out the background completely. So I've tried wider. I've tried a 16 millimeter lens on my Sony. That is the equivalent of a 24 millimeter. I find that's too wide. I really can't get close enough to really have anything interesting in the shot without introducing distortion due to the extreme angle of the lens. But that's me. A lot of people prefer that focal length and are very good at it. I'm not. This video is being shot right now with the 23 millimeter Viltrox lens. That means it's roughly, again, the equivalent of this lens in terms of field of view. This is a 35 millimeter approximate in micro four thirds. The 23 millimeter is a 35 millimeter approximate in APS-C. Now, I don't like all of the fuss that's made over crop factors and things like that. So when I talk about them, I'm not talking about depth of field. I am not talking about noise. I'm not talking about any of that nonsense. All I'm talking about is what is in front of the lens. What angle of view does the lens afford you? And as such, these two lenses, this one and this one, are equivalent. And quite handy, I might add. I also have a 19 millimeter Sigma lens. That means it's a 38 millimeter equivalent. Now, that sounds like a very small difference from 35 to 38, but it is enough to notice. So the 19 millimeter is actually closer to my comfort, my original comfort zone, which would have been a 50 millimeter equivalent, or a 25 or a 35 on APS-C. But well, I'm trying to get out of that comfort zone by shooting with this wider lens. And I have come to the conclusion that longer lenses are really not for me at this point in time. I rarely touch my 50 millimeter, which is equivalent to, I keep having to say that. I really don't like to, but I have to. Equivalent to a 75 millimeter because of my crop factor. So lenses in the 75-80 millimeter bracket, I know they make excellent portrait lenses, but I'm not shooting portraits for the most part. I'm shooting family gatherings and things on the street. And for that, the shorter focal length tend to work a little bit better. Sometimes I will put on a zoom. I have the excellent 12 to 40 f2.8 Olympus zoom, which of course gives me everything from a 24 millimeter equivalent to an 80 millimeter equivalent, and all at f2.8. Excellent lens, but rather large and heavy for the gear that I use. Now, compared to an actual 24 to 80 f2.8, it's small and light. But for my purposes, it's still big and heavy, because look, this is what I'm using now. This is my typical kit. And, well, I don't want to get into gear videos. I've done too many of those. So please don't see this as a gear video. Notice I didn't give any specs on these lenses other than the fact that we have popular fields of view. And I'm using a 35 millimeter film equivalent, in other words, a full frame equivalent, just so that we have a common area of comparison to be able to look at the things that we like best. So which lenses, which fields of view do you like best? I have available to me everything from a 24 millimeter equivalent. I'm not going to count my fisheye lens, because a fisheye lens is fun. It's just a toy. You can get very artistic images from it, but it's not going to fit in the straight photography that I'm referring to here. So I've got everything from a 24 millimeter equivalent on up to the equivalent of something on the order of 560 millimeters when I start putting together my longest zoom with a teleconverter. Which do I use the most, though? Basically, anything from a 28 to a 50 millimeter equivalent. The 24 is a little too wide. Anything that's beyond a 50 millimeter equivalent is just a little bit too long for most of my purposes. So the result is I've settled in right now, at least, on this 35 millimeter equivalent just to get used to it. I'm not a prime lens snob. Let's face it, this lens is not a lens to be snobbish about. This is a very poorly rated lens. It's not particularly sharp. Its edges are rather soft. And until I stop it down to about 4 or 5.6, it's not going to give me nice edge-to-edge sharpness. But if I'm shooting on the street, then I'm probably going to have it on 5.6. And I'm going to want enough depth of field to be able to get the whole scene in focus. I'm not looking for razor-thin depth of field. I'm not looking for ultimate sharpness. I'm not taking pictures of birds where I want all the feather detail. I'm just taking pictures of action on the street or family gatherings. Well, this video has gone on far too long. So just give it some thought, folks. What focal lengths do you like best? What focal lengths speak to you, if you want to be artistic about it? What focal lengths do you find yourself shooting in most of the time? I'm not a Lightroom user, so I can't just go into Lightroom and tell it to find all of the different focal lengths and gather them up for me so I can see which ones I shoot the most on. Instead, it's got to be rather anecdotal. And I know that 50 millimeter and 35 millimeter equivalents are where most of my images are these days. Well, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you want to see more of my videos, by all means subscribe to this channel. And if you know of anybody who may want to see this particular video, by all means share it. And, well, bye for now.